Szanowni Państwo, za chwilę rozpoczynamy kolejną część kongresu. Prosimy o zajmowanie miejsc na sali głównej.
He got Trojan football, he got monkey finger, he should Coca-Cola, he say, I know you, you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me. Back protection he got, walrus gambut he got, on a cyber he won, spinal blocker he got, feet down below his knee. Hold you in his armchair, you can feel his disease. Come together right now over me. Roller coaster he got, early warning he got, muddy water he won, mojo filter he said, 1 and 1 is 3. Got to be good looking 'cause he's so hot.
Witam Państwa ponownie po przerwie kawowej. Proszę o zajmowanie miejsc. Przed nami bowiem pierwsza debata tegorocznego Kongresu Polskiej Izby Ubezpieczeń. Nosi ona tytuł Konkurencyjność, regulacje. I rzeczywiście jest tak, że znajdujemy się w tym kontekście w bardzo wymagającym świecie. Dlatego też już za chwilę wspólnie zastanawiać się będziemy, jak znaleźć równowagę między otwartym, innowacyjnym rynkiem, a rosnącymi wymaganiami regulacyjnymi. Czy obecne przepisy wspierają rozwój sektora ubezpieczeń, czy też stanowią dla niego barierę zarówno w Polsce, jak i w Europie? Gdzie leży granica między niezbędną regulacją a przeregulowaniami? Na te pytania spróbują znaleźć odpowiedź uczestnicy debaty. Przed Państwem Jan Krzysztof Bielecki, były premier Rzeczypospolitej Polskiej, minister do spraw integracji europejskiej, doktor honoris causa Uniwersytetu Gdańskiego. Zapraszam. Dr Vittorio Grilli, były minister gospodarki i finansów Włoch, ekonomista i wykładowca akademicki. Profesor Jacek Jastrzębski, przewodniczący Komisji Nadzoru Finansowego. Zapraszam panów na scenę, a debatę poprowadzi Cezary Stypułkowski, prezes zarządu Pekao SA. Zapraszam panów. Panie prezesie, oddaję panu głos.
Dziękuję bardzo. A few words of introduction, because I'm one of the members of the programming committee of this Congress, and 4 of us who've been involved in these debates. Effectively a year ago, just after the Congress, I think it was inspiration by Piotr Śliwicki, who is somewhere. has suggested that, you know, since we started this discussion just after publication of Draghi's report, and it was very much about the competitiveness position of Europe, we decided that we'll go into this competition issue and we will try to put some flavor in the context of Poland, but obviously what is needed is also sort of pan-European perspective. And this panel is very much devoted to give some flavor how things are being sort of perceived, managed, addressed from the European perspective. The first thing, and what we discussed within the group of members of the programming committee was very much about how we can translate specifically competitiveness of Europe vis-à-vis the US. China is a very important player, but I would say still remote and still to some extent exotic for ourselves. So the message was, okay, we know one thing, US capital markets are bigger, US banking sector is stronger, not necessarily in insurance. Insurance in Europe is relatively strong, and I would say easily comparable to what's going on in the US market. Both are relatively fragmented. On the reinsurance side, I think that Europe is leading the show in the world, you know, specifically with Swiss Re and Munich Re. So we have this new environment, and you know, when you look into the Draghi's report, the major message is there is a need for consolidation in Europe, and there is a need, and there is a very, very subtle difference in wording, because we are using this concept of deregulation. I would say deregulation is a word which, you know, in different languages can be differently interpreted. I think that, you know, the focus is really on simplification. And I think that, you know, in the context of our dialogue, I think that, you know, we will rather focus on simplification. One aspect which I wanted to draw your attention to is that there is some kind of a statistics which I recently read, which compares the number of regulations which have been issued by European Parliament between year 2000 2004, comparing to 2020 and 2024. And the number of regulations has grown from 370 something to 450, more or less. But the number of words used in particular individual or statistically measured regulation has been doubled. So we talk about lots of words, more obligations, more requirements, more reporting. So overall, we are talking about more complexity. And Draghi's report basically points out to one thing. This, I would say, premier, beautiful regulation, you know, limits the competition in Europe and makes us less competitive vis-à-vis the outside markets. So we have two problems. One is the scale of the operations. Size matters, and the European institutions are smaller. Like, you know, if we talk about the capital, if we talk even the balance sheets, you know, most of the institutions are smaller than the US. The depths of the capital markets, which we lack a lot, you know, the US capital markets are disproportional to what we have in Europe. There are reasons we will not be digging in. But overall, we are talking about the necessity to some extent, sponsor consolidation. That's the message. The second, which you can draw from Draghi report, is necessity to simplify. Then, you know, the cross-border issues are still very important and complex in Europe. So we are having a lot of issues to be addressed, not easy. I would say most of the things are complex, and on top of that, we are having a kind of a dilemma between what is a national and what is pan-European, and what, you know, where is the sovereignty in today's environment, and how it can be defined. And I will start with this last message, and I will turn to Jan Krzysztof. For a number of years, there was a discussion about what is, you know, what is supreme, whether we are talking about the national interest or we are trying to protect or promote European perspective. In last few years, I would say there is a kind of a shift, and we are operating in an environment where the policies are changing. And if you listen to a number of politicians in Europe, even if you listen to Prime Minister Tusk, whose background is in a liberal faction, the focus on national interest, protection, is growing. How to reconcile this with this pan-European perspective, this necessity to mount 800 billion, to streamline the regulation in the relatively complex environment which consists of 27 countries?
Thank you for your kind, short introduction and also the intriguing question, which I'm more happy than answer in 15 minutes before lunch, and then we go, hopefully. But it's like with today's conference, your question, frankly speaking, because we had some voices. The situation is excellent, cooperation is fantastic, future is bright. But then we had some voices saying that the future is really bad, and the challenges are enormous. So, and the most confusing, and this was also reflected in your question, was whether we speak about Europe or EU or Eurozone, or what animal actually do we have in mind? Because this is not the same. And let me, just for the sake of this nice conversation, say very openly, there is no such animal as Europe. We would like to have united Europe, integrated Europe, but this is bullshit, And Brexit is one of the great examples. And then other friends from Hungary or Slovakia is another, and so on, so on. And we will come back to some specific countries. When we speak about cooperation was good in the old days when Austrian bank acquired 17 banks in Eastern Europe. But that was fantastic cooperation, and they were pretty happy of that because expanded the performance. But if we go the other way around, it's not that simple. When Poland tried to buy AIB, the bank which collapsed during the financial crisis, and the enthusiasm was not that fantastic. When the closest friend of the core Europe, so-called Europe, Germany and Italy, two founding fathers, they try to prove that they are very good for cooperation, consolidation, competition, blah, 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 whatever bullshit you want to say. Then, in order to prove they laugh, they consolidate the banks. I know the story how UniCredit struggled with the takeover of HFVB and Bank Austria, but this tragedy or soap opera with Commerzbank is the best example that it doesn't work. It doesn't work, simple like that. I think that from technical point of view, well, Commerzbank is actually taken over by UniCredit.
Already?
Yes, but politically, not at all. And openly, the politicians, they say they will never allow it happen. So where do you find Europe or EU with a strong common view on any specific issue which has a really international meaning? Where?
So basically you say that after a number of years which we spent discussing the issue whether the couple has a passport, the answer is yes, still have. Is that correct? That, you know, people are still, you know, when making decisions, they are very much driven by the passport, the identity, the national boundaries?
That is not even that. It's regional. Because if you talk with the Spaniards, for them, it's a very sensitive issue, whether it's Catalonia or the Basque Country or in Germany. I think Vittorio would agree with me. It's a completely different story when you talk to the Bavarians. And what is the Bavarian interest vis-à-vis those from Hamburg or Frankfurt specifically? About Italy, I would not say a single word because I know that. Yeah. So Europe integrated on the basic, really, issues in order to protect themselves against conflicts or wars. So,
that was the background.
You found solutions for tomorrow based on the past experience. Typical traditional mistake. You resolve the problems of the future with the yesterday's solutions. Fantastic. But today, you want to compete against the Chinese or the Americans with the disorganized European Union member countries which cannot agree on the basic issues by promoting some deregulations or new regulations. How can you imagine that in the days of a serious situation, by more smart bureaucrats or administration or even clever European Commission, you can achieve a progress? No. And finally, this is based on the fundamental mistake. You try to believe that the politics is a derivative of economics. And in particular, in this specific situation, it's not true at all. Not true at all. So whether we speak about politics or we speak about economic improvement organized by the bureaucrats, which is from definition a lost case.
That refers to the famous saying by Vladimir Lenin, economy is a concentrated politics. Vittorio, you've been very much involved in European affairs, you know, in a variety of your incarnations, starting with your role as a minister in very difficult discussions during the time of the European crisis or Euro crisis. There was another incarnation in which you've been very much involved at the Commission level. What's your perspective on this, let's call that, you know, technically we say home host, which is, you know, country which is hosting the players on the insurance side or banking side, and players who aspire to be in the markets, respective markets, in the context of this passporting / capital flows between the countries, specifically at the time when the sovereignty is being so much, you know, higher in the status comparing to what we've been discussing, let's say, 15, 20 years ago.
Thank you. I think the debate is still the one of 20 or 15 years ago. We haven't evolved much. Let me start from your comment before, because I think it's quintessential. In order to progress, we have to make the rules of the game simple and clear. And we are not there. I think when you say, rightly so, we better use simplification and not deregulation, is because somehow deregulate in Europe is almost like a bad word. But I think there is a big difference between simplifying and deregulate. In my opinion, we need both. You know, because simplification, people have in mind, you know, some sort of a bureaucratic process to be made more efficient, streamlined, but the rules are good. You know, is that the application of them is too complex. But I think is also we need to, think about whether the rules are appropriate in this new competitive geopolitical scenario. To give you an example, we are regulating now. Everybody says you have the greatest regulation of artificial intelligence. Great. We have no artificial intelligence industry to talk about. And the artificial intelligence company will stay clear of coming to Europe because the regulation are, so complex now that they will not find an appropriate environment where to make mistakes, because that is the point.
You refer, I understand, to GDRP.
Sorry?
You refer to GDRP in Europe,
Absolutely.
which, is a big question mark to which extent, it was stoppage for, I would say, innovation in Europe.
Yeah, I think that, which is also the difference when you say US, maybe China, we understand less. When you innovate, you don't need to be prudent. You need to go ahead, make mistakes, and then pay for the consequences. Now, home and host, why we're mentioning about regulation. Regulations is also what makes difficult to look at the market of Europe as a unified market, okay? And there are rules where even if in theory we have a single market, it is not. It's total, it is not. And there is where I think you're right, we have two levels of discussion. One is the political, and the other one is an economic and financial. Because if there were only an economic and financial discussion, we will already have a single market. Then you get a political layer, which is, we all understand why it is there, but to me the quintessential problem is that we are still stuck in a way where the founding father of the union were, where basically the big problem is, how do I collaborate with my enemy, which was the next door state, because that's Europe. The enemy usually was next door. And so all our rules was a protection so that the next door neighbor will not do bad things to you, including, for example, even now, when we think about antitrust, we have the national antitrust, the European antitrust, and you are not judged with the right to me meter, which is competition is global, it's not within. So we have to, and this is still dominate, the political discussion where you still are afraid, if you really open up in a European way, what is my door neighbor going to do to me, okay? And I think here is the difficulty of politics, to make politics being the way to explain why in this new world, what was maybe in the past your enemy or maybe not your friend, now has to be your friend, because the real enemy is beyond Europe. And there is no one, and it was repeated more than once during your conference, which is an excellent conference, the Draghi report, you mentioned it, we need to change the scale. And to change the scale... I see
Mr. Bielecki having a strong temptation to intervene.
You like calcio?
Yes.
You understand calcio?
Inter Milan.
Yes, okay.
Fan.
So let's speak 2 minutes about football. So even in the concentration camp, they could play the prisoners against the wardens. So football was sometimes used to get across political tensions and so on, better understanding. And Europe decided to play football in the 50s in order to make people friends, not enemies. And Europe was the best in the world for the regulation of the football games.
Rules.
Perfect. Everybody follow. When we changed the rules for offside, they follow. When we introduced the yellow card, red card, they follow. And that's exactly what happened with European past, political past over the last 50 years. The problem is that today, the biggest player, they don't play football. So if you have on the pitch 11 guys who want to play football, and they are fantastic with this beauty of Italian catenaccio mixed with the Brazilian, Spanish technique, but then 11 guys come and they want to play rugby or maybe wrestling or something like that.
Cricket. It's more complex.
Yeah, it's difficult. So, and you want, and then you say to them, no, guys, no, because our values and are so that we don't accept this. But you have nothing to say to accept or not. So either you are ready to play rugby or modern football, which is changed, or you are forever condemned to be the member of a Skansen. Or
my understanding
whatever.
is that the world has got even more complex because you are referring to different games, and we are reaching the point where basically everything is started to be a freestyle. And that's the most difficult right now. Still, I understand that, addressing the future, and I understand that we need to do something in Europe. The question, at least from the financial market perspective, is, how to reorganize ourselves. And as I understand the Draghi's report, the basic challenge is to allow the consolidation, because, as I said, size matters. And then when we compare the size of the banks, insurance companies, everything, vis-à-vis the other continents, and we will not be able to compete at the national level. Even the biggest players of Europe are small by the global standards. And my understanding is that some kind of streamlining the processes in Europe is simply necessary. And the question is, how to do that. I'm turning now to Jacek to some extent also in the context of the previous discussions. We have this situation where we have to accept some players in the local market based on passporting. And how you see the situations where, there is no full-scale licensing process, and you have the situation where some player is simply notifying his presence in the local market, and as it was mentioned by Przewodniczący Wiercioch, our ability really to follow and impact is relatively low. And this is in the context of, this free move of financial institutions across Europe, because we have a free market for goods, but, services are still not fully integrated.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I get a second turn, so I'll take this opportunity to respond briefly to some of the topics that were raised before. I very much like the analogy to football or to soccer, but I guess the problem around AI regulations and European regulations at all there's a difference between regulation of football and regulation of AI, because with football we had regulations, but we also had players, and our concern about AI is that we will end up with regulations but without players. So, and I think this is it goes back to the point made by Vittorio that we have AI Act but we don't have AI. That's I think the threat that we are facing. And on the national interest and the role of national states in the economy, over the last couple of months I've been taking part in many conferences, many discussions on the implications of the new US administration that it may have on Europe. And of course there were positive and negatives being discussed. And I believe one of the positive implications is that we have clarity on some points, and we are talking openly about some points that we haven't had the courage to talk that openly before. And one of these topics is the national interest and the role of national states in the economy. So I think I consider this as some sort of a benefit that because of the clear communication that we hear from across the Atlantic and because of the clear message that we have to learn, we are becoming very open in talking about the role of national security factor and the role of state factor in the economy, including the financial markets, but maybe we have a chance to come back to this topic later. And now coming to your question about freedom of services and freedom of establishment in the context of our supervisory activities. Yes, indeed, and it's particularly relevant for Poland because we are a relatively sizable market. And what we see in the European regulatory and supervisory landscape is that, of course, there are jurisdictions where the regulatory or licensing approach may be more relaxed because they are regulating mainly for foreign markets, while we ourselves as the PFSA, we are regulating and licensing for our own market mainly. So we are taking care of our customers here locally. And for me, in the pan-European discussions around integration of the financial market, I believe that enhancing the supervision over cross-border activities, including freedom of services and freedom of establishment, this is probably one of the key topics that the ESAs, the European Supervisory Agency, should have a look at. It's particularly true for insurance business because, as you all know, the motor third-party liability insurance is a very particular product, a product which you are buying, I mean, technically for you because you need to have the insurance certificate, but someone else will be the beneficiary of the quality of this product. And the moral hazard in this market, I would say, is particularly acute. And now, as Christian also said in his introductory comment, we had to resort to some sort of nuclear scenario related to the activity of one of the foreign insurance companies operating in Poland, because it was a clear case where we saw that the business model developed within the freedom of services framework may be detrimental to the Polish market. It may also distort the competition in the Polish market. So while talking about the integration of the European financial market and integration of supervision, I'm a big fan of talking about the integration of supervision rather than about integration of supervisors. And here I'm perfectly in line with the position of Madam Commissioner Albuquerque, who is also making this clear distinction that integrated supervision does not necessarily mean integrated supervisor. And integrated supervision is particularly relevant in the context of cross-border activities, and mostly in the field of capital market and insurance. So this is clearly an area where we see a need for enhanced integration. For the time being, we have certain competences within our hands as national supervisors. It's the first time we've used them in this form as it was a couple of weeks ago. But it's a clear sign that this is an area that we should be taking a closer look at.
I have one question, still to Vittorio. There will be a sequence of consolidations. This is unavoidable for a number of reasons, including the cost for the client, including, the cost of development of technology, etc. How do you see that, from, let's say, the European perspective? Should that start with the intra-the-countries consolidation and then, the bigger players trying to sort of sneak around and potentially acquire, cross-border? Or it will start with a cross-border? There was a reference, I think, to Commerzbank, which I know reasonably well, which effectively was ailing bank for a number of years with cost income unacceptable, with no profits, etc., not the ability really to expand. There was this bid by UniCredit with 30% stake effectively right now, stuck in these political debates which are going on. Do you believe that the sequence will be rather, big cross-borders up front, or that will be intra-the-countries consolidations, which are problematic, which, has been mentioned, the Catalonia and Sabadell, well, very much the same situation. How you see this situation?
I think that logically there is no optimal sequence, but practically I think it's already happened. First you go national and you have to consolidate nationally. And by the way, as you were mentioning, Spain is a domestic issue. In Italy, it's not the Commerzbank versus UniCredit, but even UniCredit is also involved in a hostile takeover of another Italian bank, which has been somehow, quote-unquote, blocked for domestic reasons. And as you were mentioning as well, even UniCredit Commerzbank is a domestic, is a between landers in Germany. So I think that first you have to consolidate probably domestically, which has already happened. For example, in France, that consolidation took place. In Spain, except for this thing, has largely taken place. Also in Italy, a lot of consolidation domestic has taken place. There are 2 or 3 hotspots that are now being thought of. In Germany, frankly, not much consolidation has happened, and is also maybe the problem why they are still so opposed to any cross. So I think that in practice, this consolidation will have first step nationally, and in many countries already happened, and then internationally, because at that point you have fewer players, and the next markets are going to be abroad until the player think that, well, there is no need that I'm going to get into trouble in transnational transaction. I still have market shares that I can gain at home. They will do it.
As a follow-up question, okay, let's imagine that Europe will be growing. We will take the recipes from Draghi's report. Who will be the first JP Morgan of Europe?
Right now is very, very difficult because, I mean, we know if we, which is the sad part, which was not true 25 years ago, but now if you take JP Morgan capitalization, you add the first 10 banks in Europe, and they are still lower than the JP Morgan capitalization. And so I think that it's hard to say, but there are, I wouldn't name a single bank, but there are some French banks, some Spanish banks, some Italian banks that have a shot to it. Sadly, which somehow you think Germany is the largest, by far, economy, and they have no candidates.
Yeah.
You know,
no candidate from Germany.
No.
Strange.
No.
I have the most challenging question to Jan, because, you know, in the preparation for this panel, I had a separate exchange with Jan, and he said, you know, there is a need for some kind of a more political / strategic flavor. And I have a particular question which I have developed for yourself. You will not be able to respond in 15 minutes, just shorten this to 5, which is how in today's environment to manage something what I think is characterized for Europe, which is social security, so I would say social security and its spending, you know. I think Angela Merkel many years ago has said that Europe is 5% of the population, 50% of the social security spending worldwide. And I think people got used to that. The second is the spending on defense and the very high cost of energy. These 3 elements can produce a revolution. And how to, let's say, manage the politics in this environment, and what should be considered as the major issue to be addressed. Specifically in a situation where politics is getting shorter and shorter and the challenges are longer and longer. Any reference to football?
Yeah, it's not that difficult, you know. There's an English saying, very nice. Softly, softly, catch the monkey. Or they sometimes play with the accent, catchy monkey. Softly, softly, catchy monkey. What it means. You cannot go quickly or in an unplanned action, but you have to go step by step in order to catch the monkey, which is always difficult. If you try ever in your distinguished life to catch a monkey. So to translate it into politics, if Germany spent in 1990, not that many years ago, 1990, 2.8% of GDP for defense sector. And thanks to the détente, famous, and unification of Germany, they landed with less than 1%. 1% in Germany today, it's 48 billion euro. If you cut 2 percentage points from your defense spending, you have 100 billion euro in today's money for social spendings, for welfare, for well-being, and so blah, blah, blah. You can imagine. So people from the, this museum Skansen, they are now shocked that the challenges are external and are different, that there is a war. Even recently, the Spaniards understood that there is a war when the Americans, they explained them that they are at least possibly considering closing down Navy base not far away from Cadix, the most important to defend Spain from external missiles from rogue countries. So the people are changing their mentality. The politicians understood that the challenges are more serious. They spend not 1%, but 2%. Now they say 3% even. So completely changing the financial planning and also financial spendings of particular member states. So maybe under the crisis, because Vittorio will confirm, Europe only could develop through the crisis, from crisis to crisis. No crisis, no progress. Don't believe that any bureaucrats will do the, I should say, even special commission for deregulation. They will bring
Jan, you have exhausted
change,
your 5 minutes limit. Yeah, so we'll move on. We started basically to talk about the deregulation / simplification, and as I said, over the last 20 years period of time, Europe, I think, has mastered its ability to regulate. In some areas, we can claim as Europeans that we are the best in terms of the regulations, though I have to say Americans are equally good. But they are they have one ability which I think differentiates US vis-a-vis Europe, which is fast decision making. So when they decided to deregulate, some of you potentially have read I think Monday, it was on Monday in Financial Times, an article which basically says, well, they are prepared to abandon Basel III, specifically on the leverage ratio, which I think was the core of the discussion post the 2008 crisis. Europe basically has implemented, and CRR3 is in full scale since January this year. That completely changes the ability to compete, because those people who remember how the capital ratios has been developed know that the background was that in the 80s it was very much about the equal level playing field for the competition between the banks, mostly Japanese banks. That started the whole discussion worldwide about the competition, capital ratios, etc. So we end up in a situation that Basel III has been effectively implemented by, I think, 2/3 of 27 members of the Basel Committee. US have been discussing, ultimately dropped. Will that impact Europe in terms of equaling ourselves to the American standards? Which, by the way, was problematic because the US has dragged us into the crisis in 2007-8. I will start with you, and then I will move to Vittorio.
That's a great question, and I also, in answering it, I also refer to the presentation by Michał Ziemiak, the financial ombudsman, because it clearly showed that the current level of regulation is an outcome of some sort of quest for equilibrium between comfort, safety, stability on one hand, and progress and development on the other hand. And I believe that that explains a lot, because it's true for Europe, for European area as a whole, and I believe that we have decided. I mean, in our quest for comfort, we have reached such a stage of regulation where it has significantly impacted our ability to compete or to be profitable. And I have a theory that the current state of regulation or over-regulation is an outcome of a quest for comfort, and actually this quest for comfort is coming from many of the stakeholders. Because if you look at the public stakeholders, after each and every crisis, they are asked by the general public, what will you do to prevent such crisis repeating itself in the future? We'll come up with regulation. That's the simplest answer. If you look at supervisors as ourselves, where do we look for our comfort in our daily activities? We want to have a regulation because that's the easiest way to respond to any potential threats. And then you look at business players, like many of the participants in the room, and for them, the regulation is also some sort of a manual how to live, how to run the business. So I believe that the level of regulation that we have reached in the European Union is an outcome of our quest for comfort, and the price that we are paying for this comfort is the differences that we see in the figures for Europe and for the United States. And then the fundamental question is, how much of this comfort are we willing to give up in order to become more competitive? And that's a question that every one of ourselves should ask, just staying in front of the mirror, how much am I going to give up? And
that was the background of the waking call by Draghi's report.
Exactly, and
balance,
and also from our internal perspective at the financial supervision, because we've been discussing in the course of our preparations for today's panel, we've been discussing the interplay between regulation and supervision. So, to what extent can regulation be replaced by more efficient, let's say, real-time supervision? And of course, it's like hitting the nail on the head in this context, because of course it would be very useful, it would be very good for the economy to replace regulatory approach or to supplement the regulatory approach with a more supervisory approach, because it's more flexible. As you mentioned, regulators are typically fighting the previous war or the last war and not the war to come. Like with the generals frequently, and supervision has of course the significant benefit of flexibility, of being more forward-looking, being more real-time, but it requires two factors, which is first of all competence, that's clear, and the other thing is courage. And living in a world of over-regulated financial market, it's easier, it's safer. And if you'd like to go to regulate the to supervise the market, to run the business without this manual, it requires not only competence but also courage. And in terms of financial supervision, I believe there's one important factor to be added, because we are quite frequently addressed with the request for us to act more flexibly, to not to issue general regulations, but to go case by case and to be more, let's say, case oriented, like for example in the US.
Vittorio, under these circumstances, you know, JP Morgan is an American bank, obviously operating in a country like Poland, many countries in Europe, doing also business in our country. There will be significant advantage, you know, to manage the bank, to have more flexibility, to have stronger muscle. If you are out of the leverage ratio, which was, I think in the US, leverage ratio was even more stringent than in Europe. I think Europe was more or less 5%. I think minima, I think US was 4.5. If that will be relaxed, and you know some other provisions of Basel will be relaxed, do you think that Europe will do the step towards equaling the competitive position of the European banks? That means relaxation of the regime?
I think to me it's not capital ratio, leverage ratio. It's more like integrating of really a single market and being able to scale up. It's not a question of, to me, capital ratio. It's not that don't matter, but your first question before I think is quite crucial. First of all, we always speak badly about bureaucracies. My own opinion, having worked a lot, I think we have the Brussels bureaucracy is excellent. You know, as a bureaucracy, you know, they have excellent people, and when you give Brussels a mission, they will deliver. You know, single market, 5 years, they deliver a project which was like incredible. Monetary union, 7 years, they delivered. You know, when there is political will, give them a mission, they will deliver. Now, without a mission, they will start writing, okay? Rules, regulation, and they're very good at that too, you know, but probably it's not what we need. Now, second is, how does that translate, you know, for next step in Europe? And I think here, and that you were spot on, is somehow look at what happened to the big financial crisis. You know, started in the US, then contaminated us all.
Contagion.
The US took a very pragmatic matter. Here are 200 billion, banks, go and fix it, then you give it back, and in the meantime, we go to court, okay? In Europe is, That's my taxpayer money. I'm not going to put it on the table. So no money on the table and huge rules and regulations.
And contention on the way.
And both, you know, so it took us 10 years to fix something that the American took 1 year. Why, you know, clearly this is part of, I don't trust my neighbor. But then I think there is I don't want to get too philosophical, but here the big difference, how the democratic system developed in the US and in Europe, there is, to me, a quintessential difference that US has been about freedom. And so the government has been like the guarantor of freedom, of initiative, which meant I want to take risk. I want to be just sure that I can be free to take my own risk. In Europe, is about rights and protection. So, and the government has been like the guarantor to give me protection. So that means that the dial between somehow risk and return is totally different in the US and here. And so I think this, to me, is the very difficult job of politics. Try to move the dial back, you know. We can't protect anybody under any circumstances, which means in insurance, in banks, you want to have a regulation where everything is always safe, which is...
Let's move on, and let's specifically focus on two regulations which, you know, are, I would say, was the centerpiece of the European regulation over the last few years. GDRP and Green Agenda. Because on one hand, you know, one can claim, and I think that was the overall vision of Europe, it will be leading I would say, the data protection of individual, very much in line with what you just said. And the second was, okay, there is a real climate problem, and we will champion the climate discipline, if I may say. And we have introduced a number of regulations. We know already that that was an overburden. You know, every one of us who is just clicking, you know, number of consents on screen, in the papers, you know, I think that was our financial ombudsman who has referred to this, you know, in his presentation. I have to say this is counterproductive. And we had just heard about the Optimus, the new initiative by the European Union. Basically, well, we mounted the regulation, now we will cut this by 25%. There is something wrong in the framework. And, you know, just returning back to the Green Agenda, which was, as I said, centerpiece, at the same time, Europe was proud of this. And now, and we don't have the access to energy directly. So how to manage these issues nowadays, after what has happened in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the energy supply in the world, the energy appetite because of the AI, you know, energy consumption, this is non-go. Means Europe will not be able to protect climate solely. Okay, we have allies in China, but I would say US is just drill, baby, drill. So we are in a very difficult environment. Are we able still to keep the line with the Green Agenda or not? And you, GDRP, you are on the green.
You asking me first?
You are green.
5 minutes to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm watching here.
Start?
Yeah.
I should start?
GDRP.
GDPR. It's a difficult question. And what I will say now...
Easy questions are for lazy people.
What I'll be saying now does not reflect the official policy or position of the PFSA. It's my personal view. I believe that the value of the GDPR, to some extent, may be considered as a negative value. In terms of customer behavior, in terms of approach to law and regulation by many of ourselves, including me personally. And one of the reasons is that we are overwhelmed with clauses, with click-through consents, with questionnaires, with documents, and probably every one of us has experienced this. We are getting used to clicking through signing, through agreeing to documents that we haven't no real chance to read or understand. It creates a bad habit. The point is, does it really afford for additional protection? Not really. So personally, also as a lawyer, to be honest, I'm
So basically
skeptical.
For revision? Is that necessary revision of GDRP?
I would suggest looking for some light version of this regulation.
Okay.
But
Vittorio.
And can I add one more comment to the US versus EU comparison?
Yeah.
Because there was one last week I had a chance to participate in Impact Conference in Poznań, and there was a panel with the participation of Jakub Jawadowski, who is the current Minister of State Assets, and he said something in the panel that resonated very, very good with me. He said, "Okay, we are complaining about EU, we are envying the US development model, but let's admit Europe is still the best place to be born in the entire planet, probably. And if we had a poll here in the room asking the question, would you prefer to be born in Europe or in the US? I guess many of us would opt for Europe."
The best place to be born right now is Japan, because you have 50% probability to live up to 107 years.
I mean, that's a matter of individual preference, but no, but the question is a very valid one.
Though I'm not suggesting that Japan is the best. I would say, in the presence of the mayor of Sopot or his deputy, the best place is Sopot to be born.
No, very quickly, so that I can...
The green.
You know, the green agenda, it seems to me that is not now the highest priority. Certainly not in the US, but also in Europe, there are other major problems. And as you rightly said, from the point of view of our impact, if we are alone on the environment, is basically nil, and we have a huge, huge issue about energy provision. So I think that...
Vittorio, small correction. US and Europe, this is more or less 8-9% of the total population, but consuming 45% of energy in the world. So we have impact, but obviously US have even bigger impact.
Yeah, but if we are alone and everybody...
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. So I think that the green agenda now is still there, but I don't see as an impediment right now to, you know, to me, if we think about scaling up the financial market, the banking union, that's not the impediment. You know?
Since I'm under big pressure from my counterparty who sits, you know, I would say the longest distance in terms of the time, I would like to conclude to some extent, due to your presence and your expertise, very much to call on your intelligence in terms of what's going on in Italy. Because the Italian market today is the most vivid, most active market in terms of financial institutions, you know, movements, if I may say. That means, you know, acquisitions, mergers, you know, I would say aggressive moves by some players. The famous Mr. Orcel is being here and there, you know. If you can capsulize, what is a major driver of such an active market in Italy nowadays? Is that regulatory issues? These are regulatory issues, or more specific for the Italian market?
I think nothing changed. I think it's back to domestic consolidation. Italy, despite all the problem that we have, is one of the richest markets in terms of savings. We have been, you know, we have huge amount of savings, so it's very attractive for financial institutions. Let's say there's been an equilibrium over the years because a lot of vested interest was very strong in protecting their playground. Now that kind of vested interest for, you know, clearly equilibrium evolved, start showing some cracks, and then you get, you know, competition coming in. So I think at this point, what were the equilibrium before, you know, are weaker, and so now you have also this sort of different kind of quote-unquote assault, which is about consolidating the market, which is a very rich market for savings in Italy.
Time.
Yeah, so in terms of, you know, 45 seconds, so Jan, would you like to add something? Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to, firstly, congratulate the person who produced that cartoon with fantastic conclusions, which are extremely smart and summarizing fantastically few points which were raised over our panel. That's one. Then please take...
That was AI produced.
Take
our discussion.
Yeah, take three takeaways from at least my point of view from today's meeting. The first takeaway is political will comes first. Don't believe that group of bureaucrats, regulators, administrators will invent something. Never. It goes firstly from political will. Secondly, if you cannot improve the whole world, focus on your national interest and really look after that. And thirdly, if I can beg you a little bit, be as smart as Romanians shortly. Thank you.
Let's go and vote. Dear audience, that will conclude just on time. Just a few words from my side. I don't think that we are able, even it's that competent group of people can resolve all the issues of the world, Europe or even Poland. But, we try to put some flavor and some light on what's going on in Europe, in regulations, in this very turbulent time when things are changing, so rapidly. And finally, in the response to your monkey quote, I will say Germans use a very interesting saying, which I don't like it that much, but I have to refer to. Der Weg ist das Ziel. That means that, ultimately you have to move on, check the road, and hopefully you will reach your destination. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists. Thanks.
Thank you.
Big thanks to the panelists and the moderator. Dziękujemy bardzo uczestnikom i prowadzącemu tę pierwszą debatę tegorocznego kongresu. A Państwa zgodnie z agendą, ale z jednak małym opóźnieniem zapraszam na lunch. Przerwa lunchowa potrwa około 50 minut. Zapraszamy ponownie za 50 minut i rozpoczniemy wtedy popołudniową część naszego spotkania pierwszego dnia 12 Kongresu Polskiej Izby Ubezpieczeń. Do zobaczenia.